A new anti-gun propaganda campaign is being pushed by the Ad Council. Now, it uses all the typical anti-gun rhetoric, and I'm going to break it down for you. When trying to convince people of something that goes against their best interest, simply suggesting ideas won't work. In this case, when trying to get people to denounce firearm ownership, many strategies are used. Everything from simple propaganda terms like gun violence or assault weapon to implications and false premises. Now, of course, creating fake statistics presented by organizations that appear to be legitimate and pushed to the top of search engine pages is always a good tool because, of course, everyone wants to think that they're doing their own research, when in fact, the studies themselves can be nothing more than propaganda. A new Ad Council anti-gun propaganda campaign has been created, and it's being pushed by news outlets like ABC 13 out of Houston and touted as valid, when in fact, it's nothing more than another attempt at gaining support for gun legislation through fear, lies, and psychological manipulation. Look at this so-called non-biased news broadcast about the new Agree to Agree campaign.
Campaign just launched tackling an urgent American public health crisis, gun violence.
Well, we're off to a bad start. First of all, there's no such thing as gun violence. What we're talking about is human violence. Sometimes human violence is acted out with a gun, but not always. The intro that you just heard from this newscast over at ABC also called this so-called gun violence an urgent American public health crisis. It's this dishonesty from the anti-gun crowd that gets people worked up. But the real reason they want to call it a health crisis is so they can get federal government behind their fake cause and support it with taxpayer funding. Now, the real health crisis is the psychological damage and misleading nature of this type of propaganda because people actually believe it and base life-changing decisions on it, sometimes making a decision that puts them in the position of defenselessness.
Now, the goal is to protect children and teens without getting political.
All right, real quick. Anytime you create propaganda and use it as a tool to take away the rights of American citizens, in this case, their Second Amendment rights, you've already made it political. So pretending that you're taking a non-political stance on this topic is dishonest.
Brianna Connor joining us live in studio. Brianna, such a divisive issue. So how is the campaign designed to do that?
Yeah, you have to think it won't be easy, but the campaign by the Ad Council is all about conversations. It loops in parents and medical professionals like trauma surgeons who share what it's like to treat children who wind up on their operating tables with gunshot wounds.
Of course, they want to describe in full detail the emotional attachment to children on the operating table because it's the one thing that moves us more than anything. In this propaganda campaign, children are used as the leverage to get people to support unconstitutional gun laws based on emotional reaction.
These ads downplay the divisiveness by focusing on something they believe everyone can agree with. Gun violence should not be the leading cause of death for children and teenagers in this country.
Okay, here's a huge lie. It's the implication that the leading cause of child death is by bullet. The anti-gun propagandist needs people to believe this, but in reality, simply not true. It's a lie that we must continue to debunk. In reality, firearms are used up to 2.5 million times per year to stop acts of violence and save lives. But the anti-gun crowd doesn't want you to know that. The dishonest study that the gun grabbers use to make their claim that the leading cause of child death is guns is a study from the CDC and NIH called Current Causes of Death in Children and Adolescents in the United States. It's a bogus study because it includes 18 and 19-year-olds, which are the prime age of gang members. Now, if gun grabbers were honest and used children under the age of 12 years old for their study, they'd be forced to admit that the leading causes of child death are suffocation, motor vehicle accidents, and drowning. But they can't have that because they desperately need to pull at that heartstring to push their anti-gun agenda. So they find a way to include gang violence. They just don't tell you what they're doing. But the problem is, many people don't know this, so they believe the lie, and they unknowingly perpetuate that lie when the topic comes up, and they spread this false data in conversation. The folks over at ABC could be unknowingly spreading this lie as well. So far, we're not off to a good start with this fake news broadcast because the anti-gun campaign has used two false premises right out of the gate. Gun violence, which can't exist, and they put adults in their child death numbers. And we're not even 1 minute into their newscast.
The three contributors are homicides, suicides, and accidents. The Ad Council says a majority of Americans, 80%, believe productive conversations can reduce gun violence and deaths.
Of course they want to pretend to be the ones calling for conversation on the topic, but the reality is you can't have an honest conversation with these people because their entire campaign is based on lies. And although they want you to believe that they're honest and trying to save lives, their strategies are dishonest and simply for the purpose of disarming their fellow Americans. They don't really want to save lives. They want to convince you that guns are the problem while ignoring the human element in their pursuit to disarm America. The problem with arguing against their claims is that their claims are all based on false premise. And when we go down that road, we get further and further away from the truth. If we ever want to bring the anti-gun crowd to a place of truth, we must first debunk their premises. In this case, gun violence, their fake child death numbers, and the idea that they want to have a conversation. They don't want to have a conversation, especially not with someone who opposes them. They want you to shut up and listen to their propaganda. And they want you to believe it.
The good news is that our research shows that on this topic, we agree on so much more than we think, especially when we center it around our children's safety.
I also had the chance to talk with a trauma surgeon this morning on our streaming newscast. He says conversations to protect kids from gun violence don't have to get political.
Now, this claim that the conversation doesn't have to be political is a form of gaslighting. The anti-gun folks who back this illegitimate and dishonest anti-gun campaign are trying to make it look like the pro-gun side of the conversation is only driven by politics, unwilling to have a conversation and not concerned for these children. You see, the idea here is for the anti-gun propagandist to position themselves as the rational, caring side of the conversation, and all they're doing is trying to have a simple conversation, but the truth is, they're lying to you. The devil will always deceive you with a smile on his face. The truth is, we care more than they do about the children, which is why we want to make sure we're always armed and able to protect our children both at home and in their schools, which happen to be the two places the anti-gunners are trying to disarm us. Again, by attacking our rights, the political left is making it political. But by pretending that they're the ones with moral integrity in this conversation, they're positioning themselves as the good guys and trying to make gun owners and Second Amendment advocates look reckless, irresponsible, and uncaring. The exact opposite is true.
And they're certainly better than the ones he says he is forced to have far too often at the hospital.
There's a moment where I'm in the emergency room or I'm in the operating room and a child is dead because they've been shot. And I know that and the family doesn't. And there's a gap between that moment where their child is still alive to them and I know differently. And I want that gap to never end. People should have their children at home, not dead in my operating room.
This is a typical ploy to pull at the heartstrings of parents. What this doctor is doing is using gun-related deaths as a tool to push for more support for gun restrictions. But keep in mind, he mentions nothing about the sadness he feels when he sees children dying from car accidents due to drunk drivers, or any other of the many causes of childhood death. Now, this message from this doctor is for one reason and one reason only, to help you feel the pain and sorrow that so-called gun violence is responsible for. You're supposed to be so saddened and outraged to the point that you'll run to your local politician and demand that they push for more gun regulations. The anti-gun fear campaign is a powerful one, and these people understand the psychology behind implementing it. They're doing it in front of our very eyes, and there are people all across the country who are unable to see the lies and recognize what's happening to them. Those are the people these propaganda campaigns are intended for.
This campaign is called Agree to Agree, and on their website, they actually have conversation guides available to help people.
Conversation guidelines to help people? Of course, not only brainwash people with your anti-gun propaganda, but train them to further perpetuate the propaganda onto others. Now, if you thought that was bad, wait till you hear the next strategy this gun-grabbing group wants all Americans to employ when interacting with their gun-owning neighbors.
Powerful comments there from that doctor. Okay,
Yeah.
tell us a little more. What's an example of one of those conversations?
Okay, so think about it. You're a parent. You probably set up play dates all the time and say it's simple as that, according to the Ad Council. These guides they have available note parents that just as you would ask about, hey, what are the kids' allergies? What kind of animals do you have at the house? Or who will be supervising them? You can also ask if they have any guns in the home and whether they're stored safely.
This is not the first time gun-grabbing politicians and anti-gun lobby groups have tried to encourage people to get themselves involved in the private lives of others when it comes to guns. They want concerned and scared parents to interfere in the private firearm ownership of their neighbors for several reasons, but most importantly for the purpose of making gun owners uncomfortable with the fact that they own firearms. You see, if gun owners are constantly confronted and questioned about their gun ownership, in this case, in their own homes, they'll make a choice. Do they prevent their child from having play dates with other children, or do they begin to retract from their gun ownership, or even get rid of their guns? This strategy of getting nosy anti-gun parents to question their neighbor's gun ownership is part of a psychological leverage used on gun owners. They want you, the gun owner, to feel like an outcast. They want you to feel defensive and uncomfortable with your gun ownership, as if you were somehow doing something wrong by owning firearms. This goes to the societal conditioning that needs another whole video to discuss in length. But when did your gun ownership become anyone else's business? This anti-gun campaign is trying to make your gun ownership everyone's business. The other very important component to this invasive encouragement of anti-gun parents questioning gun-owning parents can also be tied to red flag laws that are in place in many states. Now, most red flag laws can be initiated by an anonymous source and approved by a judge without any due process afforded to the gun owner, at which point the guns are then confiscated and the gun owner must spend money, go to court, and try to reestablish their good name and innocence. What better way to flush out the gun owners in your neighborhood by encouraging nosy, left-wing, anti-gun parents to feel entitled to question your gun ownership in your own home? Be careful with the propaganda that you see. It can be very tricky to navigate, but when you're dealing with left-wing anti-gun types, they're trained to fool you. They're trained to gaslight you, and they're trained to push propaganda and talking points to an extent that society believes them to be true. Then they base their entire argument on false premises. They want you to argue statistics because they have their own fake statistics to use against you. They want you to argue for gun rights while using the death of children against you, so you look like you don't care. And they want you to defend your gun ownership against what they have set up to be the moral position. Well, it's our job as Second Amendment advocates, as gun owners, as real Americans, to cut their false premise off at the knees. They don't deserve to continue their charade and base their argument for gun control laws on things that simply aren't true. The basis for their arguments are most often lies, and that's where our focus should be. Understanding their true intent, which is never saving lives and always disarming their political opposition, will help expose the evil and deceitful nature of their arguments. Thanks for watching Bullet Points. I'm Dan Wass for Gun Owners Foundation. You can find more Second Amendment content and updates at gunowners.com.